There are a number of stories of people who were supposed to go on the Titanic, but for whatever reason, at the last minute, they were unable to make the voyage across the Atlantic, which likely saved their lives. However, there is one of these stories that has always stuck with me ever since I first researched Titanic for a History vs. Hollywood article almost 20 years ago. It's the story of how the discovery of a floating head resulted in one traumatized father having to give up his position on the doomed ocean liner. The story was told several decades after the sinking by his daughter, a local Southampton resident named Iris Lee, who was in old age when she was interviewed and explained what had happened. Iris said that on April 8, 1912, 2 days before the Titanic was set to embark on its maiden voyage, her father was working in the docks in Southampton, England, repairing a ship. While at work, he discovered a human head floating by in the water. He was in such a state of shock by the discovery that a doctor came and gave him a shot to calm him down. The shot, which was possibly either morphine or chloral hydrate, knocked him out for so long that he had to give up his position as a carpenter on the Titanic. Let's now listen to a rare audio clip of Iris Lee telling the rather shocking story that in the end made her parents thankful to God that her father wasn't able to board the ship, even if it was due to a rather gruesome discovery. After the clip, I'll explain what we know about the man who took her father's position on the Titanic.
Quite often heard my father and my mother talk about the fact that every year when the anniversary came round, they used to thank God. And of course, over the years, I used to say, and my sisters, why do they thank God every time? And the fact is that my father had been signed on as carpenter for the Titanic and was going away. But 2 days beforehand, he was working in the docks, repairing some boat or the other, and he saw floating by a head with no body and hair, he used to explain, about a yard long. And it was such a shock to him that they had to call the doctor in to get him off of the ship onto the dockside. And the doctor gave him some injection or the other that put him out, and he was out, well, long enough that he wasn't able to take his position on the Titanic. So that's why my parents used to say that they were thankful to God.
It's not hard to imagine that initially Iris's father must have been extremely disappointed that he had to give up his position and employment on the ship. After all, it was the maiden voyage of the celebrated RMS Titanic, the largest ship on the sea at the time, and it was deemed unsinkable. Iris's father could have never imagined then that his gruesome discovery at the docks 2 days earlier, which had left him traumatized and in need of a doctor, was actually a blessing in disguise, and one that almost certainly saved his life. Just 5 days later, on April 15th, hours after the ship sank, news would reach Southampton of the RMS Titanic's fate at the bottom of the ocean after striking an iceberg roughly 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. Of the estimated 2,224 souls on board, some 1,500 perished, mostly due to either hypothermia or drowning. The sinking was the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster to that point. While an extremely odd twist of luck resulted in Iris Lee's father never boarding the ship, it's not hard to wonder who took her father's position on the Titanic and what was that person's fate. It turns out we don't have to wonder. We know that Iris's father was going to be employed as one of the carpenters on the ship. According to the ship's records, the Titanic had 2 carpenters on board, John Maxwell and John Hall Hutchinson. One of these 2 men was presumably hired to take Iris Lee's father's position on the Titanic. The head carpenter, 29-year-old John Maxwell, was responsible for the ship's structure, including damage control and fresh water supply. He had been on the ship for her delivery from Belfast to Southampton, and he signed on again in Southampton on April 6, 1912. This was the day that most of the Titanic's crew signed on. This was also 2 days before Iris Lee's father discovered the floating head at the docks on April 8th. which resulted in him having to give up his position on the ship. This means that John Maxwell couldn't have been the man who replaced Iris's father, since Maxwell had already signed on for the voyage when Iris's father made his gruesome discovery. That leaves the other carpenter, 28-year-old John Hall Hutchinson, who was listed as the ship's joiner. Part of his duty was to make any needed repairs to the ship's interior woodwork and furniture. Hutchinson is recorded as signing on to the Titanic on April 10, 1912, the day the ship departed from Southampton. This makes sense since replacing Iris's father's position on the Titanic would have been a rather last-minute ordeal. This supports the obvious conclusion that it was John Hall Hutchinson who was assigned Iris Lee's father's position on the ship. During the voyage, Hutchinson is believed to have befriended first-class passenger and Titanic survivor Marie Grace Young. Each day, he took her below deck to check on some expensive chicken she was bringing back to America. She rewarded his kindness by tipping him with some gold coins, to which he replied, "It's such good luck to receive gold on a first voyage." John Hall Hutchinson was likely the carpenter who hurried to the bridge to inform Captain Smith that the forward compartments were rapidly flooding. He perished in the sinking, along with the other carpenter, John Maxwell. Hutchinson's body, if recovered, was never identified. Despite giving up his spot and never actually boarding the RMS Titanic, Iris Lee's father must have experienced a certain amount of survivor's guilt, while at the same time feeling extremely lucky to be alive. What turned out to be one man's good fortune became a cruel twist of fate for another. I suppose the same could be said about passengers who canceled their reservations, only to have someone else jump at the chance to get their spot. This includes famous people at the time like J.P. Morgan, who decided not to return on the Titanic and instead extended his stay in Europe. Milton Hershey cut his European vacation short due to urgent business matters and instead returned on the SS America. Henry Clay Frick, whose wife sprained her ankle in Italy and was still recovering, canceled their voyage on the Titanic. Presumably, like Iris Lee's father, they were all thankful that God had spared them a watery grave some 2.4 miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic, but at the same time mourned the misfortune of those who may have perished in their stead. If you enjoyed this little-known Titanic story and want to hear more stories surrounding the maritime disaster, including how the James Cameron movie compares to the true story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Anchors away, my friends.